Now, experts in key sectors of the economy have cautioned that the nation risks losing 50 billion naira daily should the organized labor embark on a strike on Tuesday. That we know it's already in place. They were unanimous on the plight of Nigerians, but warned that the timing of the industrial action would further destroy the economy. It was particularly stated that apart from compounding the nation's economic problems, the strike would create fears and send wrong signals to foreign investors. So this morning, I'm being joined by Tunji Andrew, CEO, Awabah, and he will be talking to us more about this. But then before I bring Tunji on board, let me quickly link up with our Abuja Bureau Chief News Central Television, that is Amadine Uyi. Amadine Uyi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Just tell us what's it really between the NLC, the TUC, and the Nigerian government right now? Because we know that the industrial action is in place, but then we've not seen full compliance all over the country. So have there been negotiations? Have there been talks? What has been the fallout of these so-called engagements, if there has been any?
First of all, yesterday, unfortunately, there was not much compliance by government workers and government agencies. So what happened this morning was that we saw that labor began setting these agencies that there was little or no compliance. Yesterday, we appealed to the general distribution. We saw it locked with some labor unions at the other side of the workers. The outside of the workers into that complex. We also said
Quality from your end.
and we visited the headquarters of the Nigeria Labour Congress, where we saw labor strike to ensure that staff where the go to their offices 2 days to day.
Hello, Amadine. It's been quite hard hearing you and the things that you've said of late. Of course, there's a poor audio quality from your end. It's something that I believe that engineers are trying to look into at this time. But then, Amadine, what we're going to do is to still try to bring you back on to do a recap of how the compliance has been with the industrial action, looking at it from the capital territory, that is Abuja. We'll bring you back in a bit. But then let me just quickly switch to our guest, Tunji Andrew, CEO, Awabah. Good morning to you, Tunji.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's nice to have you around also. So let's just begin to set things straight now. This is not the first time this year that the labor union will be embarking on a strike. And at this point, Nigeria risks losing about 50 billion naira daily as a result of downing tools. Now, we just had a correspondence with one of our reporters in Abuja, and we saw a little bit of traffic, which means that people might not really be in tune with what the NLC and the TUC has directed in terms of industrial action. But then if we are to look at it in total, now, is the union's action justified, and how badly hit might the economy be at this particular time?
I think you've asked many questions there, and the union obviously feels that they do have a reason why they should be out taking this action at this particular time. The union has its primary objectives, and that is to be able to support workers and generally the labor force at large, which is really a large portion of the Nigerian economy. So the labor union themselves feel that they have a responsibility to their constituents. On the other side, there is the conversation about the economy, and there is the conversation about how much of this drags down economic activity. As an economist, I know that definitely strikes do affect economic activity. I don't think it is as blown up as we usually make it out to be. But the whole idea that you can't move within the economy is always a problem. And that is why it is done to begin with. It is done to be able to force the hand of government so that government will, come to the table and sit down with them and, have conversations. So I think the general context here is an immovable object, coming against an immovable, an unstoppable force. One will have to give way. And I think the best way to fix this is what has always been, is for both parties to come to the table and have a conversation.
Of course, we understand that that has to be done. But then we know that industrial action is a right of any labor union all over the world. But then when we begin to see the frequency at which it occurs within a year, don't you think in a way it might affect investors' confidence and the possibility of investments not coming into the country, because there is a certain perception that is created when we have this bit of instability within the labor markets?
No, I do not think that should be much of a focus, because there is no country across the world that labor strike actions do not occur. We have seen in the UK, we have seen in France, we have seen across the world really that strikes are a normal part of a democratic society. So looking at it from the perspective of it discouraging investors, I don't think so. In fact, if anything, it does show that your democracy is robust enough, because there are parts of the world where it is highly punishable to actually do what labor is doing. So while of course I'm not condoning the fact that labor is having several strikes, especially when there is a court order, there's a court conversation really that is around this. I think we should also not throw away the fact that it is a right, a legal right. It is a fundamental right for people to carry out their displeasures or express their displeasures by what labor is doing, as long as there's no disturbance to property, there's no destruction, as long as it's within the ambience of the law, it is allowed to happen in that way. But I also say that the leaders of labor should also see that there are few people who do not work in a 9-to-5, and there are few people who will not get paid because they were not able to go out and carry out their economic activity today. And labor needs to be able to think about that when they do these things, and be able to be slightly open to dialogue, and I'm sure the government is also open to it.
Okay, Tunji, let's just quickly look at a few considerations. Part of what the labor union has been at the neck of the Nigerian government has to do with the issue of increase in minimum wage. And just recently, the Nigerian government signed into law 35,000 naira increase as minimum wage for Nigerian workers. And there have also been talks about giving palliatives to Nigerians, to cushion the effect of the fuel subsidy removal. And of course, a couple of times now this year, the Nigerian government has released certain sums of naira to just cushion the effect and help some Nigerians live by looking at the economic hardship that the country is faced with based on these several policies of government. And another thing that has to do with the issue of the refineries, 2 out of the 4 refineries that were meant to come on board. And the Nigerian government has said that by December and February, 2 will be operational, and the Nigerian government had come out to tell the NLC to give it time to allow its policies roll and to see that these critical areas of contentions come to light, and of course the refineries begin to work. But then we still see that the NLC or the labor union are still neck deep into their demands, and in some quarters they are saying that the Nigerian labor is not patient enough. So I'd like to just know from you, is it that the Nigerian government has not done enough in these areas, or you think that there is still a need for the labor union to exercise a little bit of patience and understanding even as negotiations go on?
Another packed question. Looking at everything you said, there are a few considerations. The first consideration is in the fact that, government and labor did not sit down to have a conversation when they were going to increase the price of petrol. There was no conversation. The conversation of increasing minimum wage has been happening for a while. I think it has been for years. I think in 2020 or 2021, it was increased to 30,000, and there's been another conversation around it being increased. So that is an ongoing conversation. Then you juxtapose that ongoing conversation with the conversation where petrol is tripled in price, which is something I support, by the way, and then it directly affects other things across the economy. Then we have the issue of devaluation of the naira, where you can find the naira selling far higher than it was selling a year ago. So the standard of living and disposable income are greatly squeezed at this point. If government is going to ask for that consideration, then there should be more conversations between government and labor. And that conversation is in the fact that labor represents a large portion of the working force in Nigeria, and the government knows that it is leading an economy that is filled with working people. So that conversation must happen. And it is in the fact that the government has gone on to do its own sides, and then in the middle, it's saying, okay, labor, understand with us, give us some time to be able to do this. So on both sides, I'm not saying any party is correct, but you must understand the side of labor in this fact that, government has taken some steps, and those steps have gone far before it's then carrying labor along in the conversation. And labor is saying we still have a responsibility to our constituents. So I do agree that, all the things you have said, the refinery is not working, the fact that, it will take some time for government's policies to come into play. But then you must also realize that first things first, the refineries working doesn't directly impact price of petrol. As long as we are going to sell crude oil at the global and international price, petrol will still be at the price. What it will affect is availability of petrol. It will not directly affect the price. And that is something I'm sure labor understands. And they're saying, if petrol prices are going to triple, then you should do something to minimum wage. And let's be real, 30,000 as a minimum wage in Nigeria of today is greatly, I'm trying to find television appropriate words to use, but it is not acceptable. Very few, if a lot of people watching this program right now eat and have meals in the afternoon for as much as that, then you can imagine having that your entire salary for the entire month be 30 or 35,000 naira. It's almost ridiculous. And I think, this is the point where government needs to show a bit of empathy. The palliatives, and I say this with all due respect, the palliatives will not work. They did not work the last time. They are not going to work this time. Palliatives are subjective because first things first, we do not have adequate data to be able to distribute it adequately across houses and homes across the country. We saw what happened with the US during COVID, where checks were issued based on social security numbers. In Nigeria, if you decide to go to a particular community and just give out bags of rice, how do you know if somebody from the next community is not coming here to take 2 bags of rice and waiting for his own community? We need a bit of a structural way to do it. So I don't think palliatives are going to work. We need to find a more structural way to be able to do it. And I think that is what labor is speaking to in terms of salaries being increased. So I think this is the way both parties are having the conversation is not robust enough for the realities of what is on ground. let's be real. The economy is difficult for people today. Let's not try to, shy away from that reality. If it is true, then we need to take it seriously. And I don't think Labour feels the government is taking it seriously enough.
Okay, to wrap things up, Tunji, we know that Nigeria is largely dominated by an informal sector. Of course, we do not know for how long this industrial action would last, but then it impacts most especially small businesses, small-scale businesses, and other kind of businesses within that range. Of course, you are a business owner. In situations like this, how do you think it affects them, and what kind of reprieve do you think would be adequate to help them keep afloat, even as we know that there would be halts and hitches in terms of transactions and the businesses and operations that they usually carry out day by day?
I can tell you it's going to be difficult. Whenever it happens around in my own city, we generally tend to tell people to stay home because we're a bit worried about their safety and things like that. So it does affect economic activity. That is not a given. Is not to be questioned. And of course, business owners too tend to lose a lot of money in this time. And the general context is I believe that government needs to come out and state out its plan clearly. I don't even think I understand the government's plan. Also, on this conversation, Labour needs to also state out its plan. I think that the general context is that we both need to force both of them to the table. So, and they need to carry all of us along, because if I am going to lose money, from the industrial action, at least I need to know why that I'm losing this money. I need to know what the government is doing on their side. I need to know what Labour is demanding clearly. So those are conversations that we all need to be, clearly carried along. I don't think we should talk about, compensating businesses like us, because the conversation is for the greater good of the Nigerian economy. And if it is better in the Nigerian economy, it's better for all of us. So we do need this kind of conversations to happen, and we do support successful dialogue between the government and Labour. But I think both parties need to let us know and clearly carry us along and know that we are the primary constituents in this conversation. We business people, we workers are the primary conversations between the government and Labour. So government needs to speak to us, Labour needs to speak to us.
Okay, well, to just quickly chip this in, we've seen in a few instances or in a few areas in the country where activities are still continuing, things seems normal, businesses are still ongoing, maybe not at the optimal percentage at which we would have it in a normal or in a sane climb. But now we see that businesses are still ongoing despite the fact that there's an industrial action, and that is a huge departure from what used to obtain way back then. Just in a few minutes, does it suggest that Nigerians are tired of industrial actions, industrial breaks? Because, of course, like we've been able to establish, it affects businesses, it affects transactions. Does it look as though that Nigerians are tired of these industrial breaks and probably are not too in tune or confident enough about what the government is willing to do and what the labor union is tabling and willing to achieve?
I don't think it is that Nigerians are tired of industrial actions, because you will still see things like NSAS and things like that happened recently that, Nigerians don't really mind industrial actions. I think what it is that over the years, over decades, several decades, the NLC and the TUC have, due to the way people have felt about how some things happened in the past, there's been a bit of erosion of confidence, where people would be preparing for an industrial action in the morning, and then somewhere in the middle of the night, they hear that there's dialogue that has happened and then it's not going to happen anymore. And I feel a lot of Nigerians have become disillusioned by the two organizations, the NLC and the TUC. And that's why we see that, like I said, NSAS, took a life of its own, because people just believed it was, the people that were, having that, organized protest. So I don't think it's that Nigerians are tired. I just think it is that, NLC and the TUC need to do better to, restate the confidence that Nigerians used to have with them. I remember very vividly under Adams Oshomole, Nigeria was shut down under former President Obasanjo for weeks, on the same petrol conversation, weeks and weeks. So I do remember that very vividly.
Okay.
And it was not even in Abuja and Lagos alone, it was across the country.
True.
That was a Nigeria that trusted the NLC. I don't know if that is still the same Nigeria today.
Well, we hope that whatever the case may be, there would be a consensus of what needs to be done to move Nigeria forward as regards the reservations that Labour Union has. And of course, the government will be able to come through with its demands in terms of implementation. Tunji, Andrew, CEO Awabah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, experts have urged the government and organised labour to engage in constructive dialogue and reach a compromise to avoid the continuation of the strike action. Now, the emphasis is on strike actions, which are always detrimental to a country's economic growth, well-being, and how it affects the livelihoods of the citizens. And the more we continue to have a shutdown in operations in a country, businesses will be affected, operations will be affected, finances will be affected, citizens will be affected. And of course, there is a need to come to the table to reach a compromise for the greater good of the citizens. We go on a short break now. There's more to come on Business Edge. We'll be back with more. Don't go away.